Question 1. What is your understanding of Episcopal ministry, and how will this understanding be reflected in your approach to leadership and ministry?
I've always understood the Episcopal ministry, the ministry of the bishop, as being mainly about making connections, building bridges between people, and that involves connecting up the people within the diocese, being the visible symbol of their unity, but also being a connection between the diocese and the wider church, the bigger project, the movement of all the Jesus people that we're part of everywhere. For me, that's been pushing out in a new direction in the last little while, as I've seen the ministry of a bishop as being about expanding our horizons as well. So the connections are not simply within the church, but connecting the church to the world to which we're sent. And so the bishop as being a leader in the church's mission in that sense. And for me personally, that involves what people call a ministry of presence, being there, being seen, being engaged with people, being a presence in parishes, in the meetings of the different networks and so on that happen in the diocese, but in a way that shows interest and appreciation for what's already going on. I think it's important to see the bishop as the person who focuses the church's celebration of all that it is and all that it can be. And so connecting up to all of that work that's happening, the faithful ministry and service and community life that's already there in the church, being present for that, being present to that, showing an appreciation of it on behalf of the whole church so that we recognize each other's gifts and bring them together in the service of God's mission.
Question 2. Think about a situation where conflict threatened the unity of the community. What did you do to deal with the conflict? What was the result? How did you deal with unresolved issues? Looking back on this situation, what would you do differently?
When I think about a situation of conflict that I was most personally engaged with, I think of the situation that I came to in my previous appointment in a theological college. And when I arrived there, there was some tension on the ground already between two different theology programs that were operating, and it had many levels. There were personal issues at stake. There were theological issues at stake. There were the kind of the practical issues of how the institutions carried out their programs. But it was also becoming a part of diocesan life as well, as people were supporters of the two programs, and to a lesser extent sometimes antagonists to the ones that they didn't to the one that they didn't appreciate as much. So my response to that, coming into that situation, was to be very deliberate, very intentional right from the start about working with my counterparts in the other institution. And that involved, in my very first year there, setting up a one-week intensive course, which I co-led with the director of the other program, and trying to make sure that from the start I wasn't kind of co-opted into that conflict that was already there, and looking for a way to bring the gifts of the different programs together. We each had something to contribute to that, and I think we worked well together, and we were able to put on a really good program for about 20 students, including people who represented both sides of the aisle and people who came from outside the diocese for that program too. So the outcome there was some good positive leadership development in terms of what we did with the students. It was some bringing together of insights and perspectives that weren't as easily being brought together because of the conflict, and some overcoming of that negative history. I've always said the only way to deal with negative history is to write more history to make new things happen. Now, there was, as you say, unresolved issues, things that came out that continued to be part of that tension, and I think that's part of what surprised me in a way, was learning how deeply rooted those kinds of personal conflicts can be, and how it's never a simple matter. It's never a matter of just doing something and that's going to make it all go away. So as I went forward in that, I think I came to realize that that people wouldn't necessarily just all like each other all of a sudden, or perhaps ever, and that wasn't anybody's fault. You didn't have to blame yourself or blame the other person for that, but that you could still see constructive and creative outcomes happening that were positive things, and maybe the way to deal with that sense of conflict being a natural part of life is to recognize that as you bring people together to work on things together, that's the important thing, is that something positive happens for the service of God and God's kingdom and God's church, and that God will, in His own way, work on us and bring us closer together as the time goes on, or as we recognize our own needs to repent and turn back towards each other. What I would do differently, I think, simply recognizing that from the start, if I had it to do again, simply recognizing that it wasn't about being liked by the people who I wasn't liked by or who had formed a negative impression of me, and focusing a bit more on the task, recognizing that that's what was important. I think that's something I do now, more importantly. And the other thing that I, on reflection, would do differently is pray more about it while it's going on. That was an insight that came to me after the fact, to recognize that even in our work, in the way that we organize the tasks that are in front of us, there is a spiritual dimension, because there is that relational dimension of the people that we're working with and the work that we're doing that serves other people. And so to recognize that God has a hand in that the Spirit moves in the way we do our work, and that has something to do with what happens when we're in conflict with other people as well. And that, honestly, that God has a very different perspective on our all too human conflicts too, that perhaps standing back from that and seeing what God sees and being enabled to see that through prayer is something that I try to practice more now as a way of steering myself through conflicts and the way they affect the work that we do.
Question 3. The Church needs new models for ministry as membership and attendance decline, and we seek to respond to our changing relationship with the world. As Bishop, how would you support the desire to renew our life and ministry within the Diocese of Calgary?
When I think about new models for ministry and mission, the thing that I've learned most clearly about that is that they have to be organic. That is to say, they have to grow out of the situation and the place where the mission and ministry is happening. And so the way that we structure things, the new ways that we're learning to structure things, come in many different shapes and sizes. And I've experienced that in rural New Zealand shared ministries, and in connection with the Fresh Expressions movement that's come out of the United Kingdom, or the emergent church that we're perhaps more familiar with in North America. All of those are organic responses to the circumstances that people find themselves in as Christians, trying to communicate the gospel and to organize their community life for the gospel in the settings that they're living in. So the people who are best placed to figure out how to do that are the ones who have the initiative and the insight, because they're right there. They're seeing what's happening. They're responding to the needs of their communities and their networks. And I think in terms of the ministry of a bishop, the way to encourage that and to develop that is to focus on that kind of leadership, the people who are closest to the issues, closest to the challenges of communicating the gospel. That's a new kind of leadership for the church. We're more familiar with the kind of leadership that's internal, that says how do we feed our own life as a church community, and the ordained and lay leadership that does that. But we're now looking for leaders who push us beyond ourselves, who expand our horizons, and who teach us the way to do that. And there are many people like that in the church already, many people who have been trying to do that for us. So I think the role of a bishop, the role that I would see myself exercising if I were called to that ministry, would be to help identify and encourage and support and equip people who are doing that kind of work, being a kind of a leader and encourager for the leaders who are expanding our horizons in that way. And so that means getting to know them, getting to know what they're excited about, what where the Spirit is leading them and helping them to identify the call to communicate the gospel, but also to assure them that the church is ready to be behind them, which means we do have work to do within the church to make sure we actually are ready as well. So that's the kind of response to new models for ministry and mission that I could see a diocese having, and that I would like to lead a diocese in having, is finding those people with the new insights for the way that God is leading us to respond to the world around us, and to be ready to do that and to assure those people that they're supported and that we actually want them to give us that kind of leadership.
Question 4. 5 years after you have left office as the Bishop of Calgary, how would you like people in the diocese to remember your episcopacy? What legacy do you hope to leave the diocese?
Asking about the legacy that I might leave after ministry that we haven't even begun yet is a challenge. But when I think in those terms, I think first of all of my daughters who are in elementary school now, and who at the time that we're talking about would be young adults. And what I most hope for them is that they would be in a position not simply to have a church to go to, but to be enthusiastic and confident about saying to all of their friends, whomever they might meet, I want you to come with me and meet my church. and to know that that's something that we can look forward to is exciting even from this point of time, to know that that's what God is at work doing in our church, to recreating us in that way where we're prepared to invite people in and confident about what they'll find when they get there, and confident that they'll meet Christ when they come into our midst. So of course I don't just want this for my daughters, I want this for our whole community, the church. And when I think of what that means for us, to be able to welcome people in, to celebrate all that God is all of God's love for them and all of the gifts that God has given them, to bring all those people that the church hasn't been able to reach. We have a job to do to be ready to do that. We have to learn ourselves how to invite and welcome, how to prepare our own church communities for bringing new people on board and recognizing what they bring with them. But we also have to be prepared to do that in many, many ways. Even my two daughters are different enough that I can imagine one of them worshiping in a church where people have prayed for generations, and the other part of a church that meets in a different place every week, or perhaps more than one. And we're at the time in our life in the church where we're learning how to do all of those things together. But if we can build that confidence, that sense of our own capacity to invite and to welcome, trusting in God, who is at the heart of that movement, sending us out in the world, gathering people in. That's what I hope for our church of the future, that we would be the people who would say, come and meet my church, confident in ourselves, confident in God's work in ourselves, confident in the presence of the Spirit in our midst, and able to make those connections with people that we haven't reached before. But simply to be part of that would be a wonderful thing. That's the legacy that I hope for, not only for my own ministry, but for the next generation, and for all of those who are part of our church as we grow into that.